wealthy businessman, dressed in the finest tailored suit, steps out of a luxury car in front of the Grand Opal Heights Hotel. His watch gleams in the morning sun, a symbol of his success and status. But his attention isn't on the grandeur of the hotel, it's locked onto a homeless man standing near the entrance, a man whose clothes are worn, whose hair is slightly unkempt, and whose presence seems, to the businessman, an unwelcome sight in such a prestigious place. With a condescending smirk, the businessman strides forward, his voice dripping with disdain. "You think begging here will get you anywhere? This isn't the place for people like you," he scoffs, loud enough for bystanders to hear. Some guests shift uncomfortably, others pretend not to notice. But the man being humiliated doesn't react the way most would expect. He doesn't shrink away. He doesn't beg for sympathy. Instead, he simply tilts his head, watching the businessman with quiet amusement, as if he's seen this kind of arrogance before. What the businessman doesn't realize is that the so-called homeless man standing before him is none other than Keanu Reeves, Hollywood's beloved star, known not just for his legendary roles, but for his humility, kindness, and quiet generosity. But how does Keanu respond to this blatant public humiliation? And what consequences will the businessman's cruel arrogance bring? Let's rewind a bit, to just an hour before this unexpected confrontation. The Los Angeles skyline glows in the golden light of the early morning. A taxi pulls up to the entrance of the Opal Heights Hotel, its engine humming as it comes to a smooth stop. Inside, Keanu Reeves sits quietly, his face partially hidden behind dark sunglasses, a subtle attempt to keep a low profile in a city where fame is as recognizable as the palm trees lining the boulevards. Before he can reach for the door handle, a uniformed doorman steps forward with a warm smile. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Opal Heights. Allow me to assist you with your luggage." Keanu offers a polite nod, stepping out of the taxi with a single suitcase and a worn leather backpack, far from the extravagant designer luggage one might expect from a Hollywood icon. He stretches slightly, shaking off the stiffness from a long flight, before glancing up at the hotel's grand entrance. Guests move in and out through the revolving doors, their excited chatter filling the air. Inside, the lobby is a scene of pure luxury, crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over polished marble floors, the scent of fresh flowers mingling with the subtle aroma of expensive perfumes. Approaching the reception desk, Keanu removes his sunglasses. The young receptionist immediately recognizes him, her hands trembling slightly as she maintains her professional composure. "Welcome to Opal Heights, Mr. Reeves," she says, her voice steady but tinged with excitement. "Are you here for the luncheon gala today?" Keanu shakes his head, his voice calm and unhurried. "No, just here for some rest. Looking for a quiet place to unwind for a few days before getting back to work." She nods understandingly, quickly processing his check-in. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. We pride ourselves on providing a peaceful retreat for our guests. Your privacy is our top priority." As she hands him his key card, a young bellboy named James steps forward, his eyes widening slightly when he realizes who he's assisting. Still, he keeps his composure, though it's clear he's thrilled to be in Keanu's presence. "This way, Mr. Reeves," he says, leading the way to the elevator. The ride-up is quiet, save for the occasional chime as they pass each floor. James steals glances at Keanu but remains professional. Finally, they reach the penthouse level. James swipes the key card and opens the doors, stepping aside as Keanu enters. The penthouse suite is a masterpiece of elegance. Floor-to-ceiling windows offer a breathtaking view of the city stretching endlessly below. The plush furnishings, muted color tones, and a fully stocked bar all exude an air of effortless luxury. James carefully places Keanu's luggage by the bedroom door. "The bedroom is through there, sir," he says, gesturing, "and the bathroom is to your right. It has a jacuzzi tub and a rain shower." Keanu nods, taking in the space. "Thanks, man. Appreciate it." James hesitates for a moment before finally speaking up. "Mr. Reeves, if I may say, you're a legend. Just thank you for everything. Not just the movies, but, being you." Keanu offers a small smile. That's kind of you, James. Thank you. As James exits, Keanu sets his backpack down, exhales deeply, and rubs the back of his neck. A few peaceful days in this sanctuary, that's all he wants. But peace, as it turns out, won't come so easily. Because downstairs, at this very moment, a businessman is making a mistake he'll soon regret, one that will make headlines. And Keanu Reeves? He's about to remind the world why true power isn't measured in wealth, but in character. Widely praised as an inspiring tale of ambition and perseverance, practically a blueprint for success in the modern world. Keanu glanced at the book's cover, where Victor Prescott's confident smirk was prominently displayed alongside the title, Unstoppable: The Rise of a Titan. He flipped through the pages absently, catching glimpses of bold statements and self-congratulatory anecdotes about conquering industries, outmaneuvering competitors, and building an empire. Raymond continued enthusiastically, clearly captivated by Prescott's larger-than-life persona. He's one of the most powerful figures in both tech and film right now. Anyone who gets on his radar is looking at a golden opportunity. Keanu nodded, though he wasn't particularly interested in business tycoons or their self-made myths. Still, he understood the game. Money, influence, and power ran Hollywood just as much as talent did. Just as he was about to set the book back down, a sudden commotion at the hotel entrance drew his attention. The air shifted, conversations faltered, and heads turned toward the main doors. Curious, Keanu followed the movement, stepping toward the source of the disturbance. A deep, condescending laugh echoed across the grand lobby. "You've got to be kidding me," a voice sneered. "How did security even let you this close?" Keanu's eyes locked onto the scene unfolding near the entrance. A tall man, impeccably dressed in an expensive designer suit, stood with a smug expression, looking down at someone who, at first glance, appeared out of place in the opulent surroundings. The figure was clad in worn, slightly disheveled clothes, his hair tousled, his posture relaxed yet unwavering. Keanu didn't need to move closer to recognize the homeless man being mocked. Because that homeless man was him. The businessman, unaware of who he was actually humiliating, scoffed and continued his tirade. "What, you think standing around here looking pitiful is gonna get you a handout? You're polluting the entrance of a place you could never afford." His words dripped with arrogance, his tone filled with the certainty of someone used to power, someone who believed they were untouchable. A few bystanders exchanged uneasy glances, some pretending not to notice, others too entertained to intervene. But Keanu? He simply watched. He let the moment stretch, the businessman growing more self-satisfied by the second, believing his cruel words had crushed the silent figure before him. Then, Keanu did something unexpected. He smiled. A small, knowing smile, one that carried no anger, no resentment, just an amused patience, as if he'd seen this kind of man 100 times before. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm, measured, but carried just enough weight to make the businessman pause. "You seem pretty confident," Keanu said, tilting his head slightly. "Must be nice." The businessman frowned, confused by the lack of expected submission. "Excuse me?" Keanu took a casual step forward, the crowd around them growing more attentive, sensing the shift. Having that kind of certainty, that you're always the most important person in the room. That you know exactly who deserves respect and who doesn't. His tone remained light, almost conversational. That must be a lot of responsibility. The businessman scoffed again, though his bravado had dimmed slightly. "I don't have time for this nonsense." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "I get it. You're busy, powerful. People like you don't waste time on people like me." A few whispers stirred in the crowd, murmurs of realization creeping in. Some had already started recognizing him. The businessman, however, still hadn't caught on. Keanu took a slow breath, then leaned in just slightly, lowering his voice. "Good thing I'm not actually looking for your time," he said, his words carrying a quiet amusement. "Or your approval." And then, as if on cue, One of the hotel staff rushed over, looking flustered and horrified. "Mr. Reeves," the staff member gasped, eyes darting between Keanu and the businessman. It took a second. But when it hit, the businessman's face drained of color. His eyes widened as he finally, registered the features beneath the casual clothes, the effortlessly cool demeanor, the presence that made people lean in just a little closer. Keanu Reeves. The man he had just humiliated in front of an entire lobby. Keanu gave him one last glance, just a flicker of a smile, before turning toward the staff member. "I think I'll head back up to my suite," he said, as if nothing had happened. The businessman stammered, eyes darting around, desperate to salvage his mistake. "Mr. Reeves, But Keanu was already walking away, the moment already over for him. For the businessman, however, the moment was only beginning, and discarded as if they were nothing more than trash. The scene played out in slow motion in Keanu's mind, the sharp contrast between the towering luxury of the hotel and the quiet, defeated figures being pushed further into the shadows. Something inside him stirred. A familiar sense of injustice, the kind that gnawed at him when power was used to diminish rather than uplift. Victor Prescott, meanwhile, stood tall, satisfied, adjusting his cufflinks as if he had just solved a minor inconvenience rather than humiliated human beings. Keanu exhaled slowly, placing the book back down on the lounge table. His quiet retreat had just turned into something else entirely. The murmur of the lobby returned to its usual hum, as if nothing had happened. People went back to their conversations, their phones, their drinks. But Keanu couldn't unsee what he had just witnessed. And that's when it happened. One of the homeless men, an older gentleman with tired eyes and a wiry frame, stumbled as security ushered him away. His few belongings, an old blanket and a small bag, fell to the ground. Without hesitation, Keanu stepped forward, moving past the murmuring guests and stunned onlookers. He bent down, picking up the fallen bag and dusting it off before offering it back to the man. "Here you go," he said, his voice calm, steady. The moment was subtle, quiet. But in that silence, the entire room seemed to shift. Victor Prescott's satisfied smirk faltered as he finally took a proper look at the man offering kindness where he had just delivered cruelty. His jaw tightened as recognition dawned. Keanu Reeves. A hush fell over the lobby. Conversation stopped. Phones came out, recording. And Victor, for the first time that evening, looked unsettled. Keanu straightened up, holding Victor's gaze. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The weight of the moment said everything. Victor forced a chuckle, attempting to recover. "Mr. Reeves," he said, smoothing out his suit. "I didn't realize you were here." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "I figured." The businessman shifted uncomfortably. "Listen, these events, they require a certain atmosphere. You understand, don't you?" His tone was almost pleading, as if looking for validation. Keanu let a beat pass. Then, in a voice just loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear, he said, "You know, Victor, the funny thing about success is that it's measured in a lot of ways." His gaze flickered to the people who had just been cast aside, then back to Prescott. "But dignity, that's something money can't buy. And some people here seem to have a whole lot more of it than others." The weight of his words landed like a quiet thunderclap. The murmurs returned, but they weren't the same as before. Victor opened his mouth to respond, but there was nothing left to say. The damage was done. The cameras were rolling. The internet would see everything soon enough. Keanu gave a small nod to the older man before turning away, stepping past the silent crowd, past the velvet ropes, past the people who had spent years convincing themselves that wealth made them untouchable. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to stay and argue. Because sometimes, the most powerful statement is simply doing the right thing when no one else will. And Keanu Reeves had just reminded everyone in that lobby, and soon, the entire world, exactly who he was. Uneasily, glancing around as if searching for backup, but the weight of Keanu's presence had already shifted the dynamic. The crowd that had begun to gather was now watching intently, their previous discomfort giving way to curiosity and, in some cases, admiration. Keanu didn't raise his voice, didn't resort to threats. He simply stood firm, exuding the quiet confidence of a man who didn't need to prove his worth through power plays or intimidation. The woman, still hesitant, glanced at him, as if trying to decide whether she could trust this stranger who had unexpectedly come to her defense. Keanu turned to her, his expression softening. "You don't need to go anywhere if you don't want to," he said. "No one should be treated like they don't belong." The guard hesitated, his earlier bravado now replaced with visible uncertainty. He was used to barking orders at people who had no power to resist. But now he was standing in front of Keanu Reeves. And worse for him, the entire scene was playing out in front of an audience, one that was rapidly growing, with several guests pulling out their phones, recording. Keanu gave the man an out, a way to retreat without completely losing face. "Look, I get it," he said. "You have rules to follow. But treating people with dignity? That's not against any policy." The guard swallowed, his eyes darting toward the hotel doors, where a manager had now appeared, looking visibly alarmed at the sight of one of the world's most beloved celebrities in the middle of a potential PR nightmare. Before the manager could intervene, the guard finally sighed and muttered, "Fine." He stepped back, the tension in his posture melting away. "Just try not to sleep here, okay?" he said to the woman, though his voice had lost its earlier sharpness. Keanu gave her a reassuring nod. "If you need a break from the heat, I'll cover a meal for you inside." The woman's eyes widened in disbelief. I don't want to cause trouble," she said. Keanu smiled. "You're not. Just a human being taking a moment to breathe." The murmurs in the crowd turned into quiet nods of approval. Some of the guests, previously indifferent, now looked uncomfortable with their earlier inaction. A few even approached the woman, offering small bills and words of kindness. Victor Prescott, watching from a distance with his entourage, scoffed. "Unbelievable," he muttered under his breath. "Playing the hero for a lost cause." Keanu, hearing him, turned just slightly, his expression unreadable. He didn't need to engage directly. The contrast between them had already been made clear. Victor might have had the money, the power, the influence. But Keanu? Keanu had something Victor would never buy. Respect. And that kind of wealth? That lasted forever. Before Keanu could react, the unmistakable sound of a camera shutter clicking in rapid succession filled the air. Victor Prescott froze, his grip on Keanu's arm tightening momentarily before he followed the noise, his sharp eyes landing on a small group of bystanders, their phones raised, recording every second of the scene. It was too late. The moment, the aggression, the arrogance, the sheer irony of it all had already been captured. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Whispers of recognition spread like wildfire. Someone gasped. Someone else let out a low chuckle, as if suddenly realizing just how badly Victor had miscalculated. Then, the inevitable happened. A voice, high-pitched with disbelief, cut through the tense air. "Wait a second, is that Keanu Reeves?" Everything stopped. Victor, still gripping Keanu's arm, suddenly stiffened. His eyes darted to the face of the man he had just humiliated, really looked at him for the first time. The realization hit like a freight train. The man he had just berated. The vagrant he had just tried to throw out like trash. The nobody he had called lazy, useless, beneath him, was one of the most famous, respected, and beloved actors on the planet. Keanu Reeves. Victor's hand recoiled from Keanu's arm as if he had touched fire. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, his once unshakable confidence crumbling in real time. Keanu, meanwhile, simply dusted off his sleeve and took another slow sip of his coffee. His expression was unreadable, but his silence was louder than anything Victor could have said in that moment. The crowd was no longer whispering. They were watching with open amusement now, some laughing under their breath, others outright recording. Victor, realizing the magnitude of his mistake, scrambled to salvage the situation. "Mr. Reeves," he let out a forced chuckle, the sound hollow and desperate. I didn't recognize you. I was just..." Keanu finally stood, stretching slightly before tilting his head, regarding Victor like a puzzle he had already solved. Then, with the same quiet amusement he had carried all morning, he spoke. "That explains a lot." A few people in the crowd outright laughed now. Victor's face turned a shade darker, panic flickering behind his eyes. I thought..." Keanu let out a small sigh, his voice carrying that signature, unbothered coolness. "Yeah, I know what you thought." The weight of those words made Victor shrink just a little. Keanu picked up the worn blanket from the chair, dusted it off carefully, then turned to the security guard who had hesitated earlier. "Could you make sure this gets back to its owner?" he asked, his tone respectful, as if addressing an equal. The guard, clearly relieved to be out of Victor's direct fire, nodded quickly. "Of course, Mr. Reeves." Keanu clapped him on the shoulder once before turning back to Victor, who now looked thoroughly humiliated, his carefully constructed image unraveling by the second. Keanu studied him for a long moment, then simply said, "You might want to rewrite that autobiography." The crowd roared. Victor, red-faced and visibly shaken, turned on his heel and stormed back into the hotel without another word, his entourage scrambling after him. Keanu, on the other hand, took one last sip of his coffee, placed the empty cup on the nearest table, and walked off, his job here done. By the time the footage hit the internet, Victor Prescott's name wasn't trending for his latest billion-dollar deal or his inspirational rags to riches story. He was trending for something else entirely. And Keanu Reeves? He just went back to enjoying his day, because for him, kindness wasn't a PR stunt. It was just who he was. A sleek black limousine glided to a stop at the hotel entrance just as Victor Prescott's outburst reached its peak. The door swung open, and out stepped Emma Carlson, the acclaimed director known for her socially conscious films. Behind her, a small press group followed, their cameras at the ready. Emma's eyes widened as she took in the scene, Victor Prescott, the man she was there to meet, aggressively grabbing what seemed to be a homeless man. Then her gaze locked onto the face of the so-called vagrant. Her voice rang out in disbelief. "Wait, that's Keanu Reeves." A stunned hush fell over the crowd. Victor's grip on Keanu's arm loosened instantly, his face draining of color as the realization hit. His earlier bravado crumbled in an instant. Keanu stood slowly, brushing off his sleeve, his voice calm yet pointed. "You were saying?" Victor stammered, searching for an escape from the moment now being immortalized by flashing cameras and murmuring onlookers. Desperate, he turned to a security guard, barking, "Get rid of the press." But it was too late. The damage was done. Keanu, ignoring Victor's panic, walked past him, heading toward the woman from earlier who had quietly returned, searching for something. He held out the worn gray blanket. "I believe this belongs to you." The woman's eyes welled with gratitude. "I thought I lost it forever." Keanu smiled. "I'm glad I could return it. And I'm sorry for how you were treated. You deserve better." The contrast between Keanu's quiet compassion and Victor's earlier cruelty couldn't have been clearer. Emma Carlson, watching with keen interest, murmured, "Unbelievable." Victor, the man who built his image on a rags-to-riches story, treating people like this, and Keanu Reeves, she trailed off, visibly impressed. Victor, unable to handle the scrutiny, turned and stormed back into the hotel, but not before muttering bitterly, "Some people will do anything for attention." Keanu, hearing the comment, met Victor's gaze one last time. His response was simple but devastating. True respect isn't about showmanship. It's about how we treat people when no one's watching. With that, Victor disappeared into the hotel, leaving behind a crowd that was no longer murmuring in admiration, but in judgment. Later, in a quiet hotel lounge, Keanu sat with the woman, now introduced as Isabel. She shared her story, how her husband's passing had left her homeless, how she had been struggling to find a way forward. Keanu listened intently, then reached into his wallet, offering her help, not just money but a real chance. "Take this for now to get somewhere safe," he said. "Tomorrow, call this number. My assistant will help you find work and resources to get back on your feet." Isabel hesitated, then, with quiet resolve, said, "I don't want charity. I just want a chance." Keanu smiled. "I respect that. And I promise, we'll find a way." Meanwhile, upstairs in his suite, Keanu tuned into the private gala live stream. The event buzzed with speculation. Victor Prescott, once the center of attention, now struggled to hold onto conversations. Investors distanced themselves. His latest project, Titan Rising, once hyped as the next big thing, now seemed dead in the water. Then Emma Carlson took the stage. Her voice carried through the hall. "Today has been eye-opening. We've celebrated rags to riches stories for years, but maybe it's time we shift our focus to stories of kindness, community, and the quiet heroism found in everyday moments." Thunderous applause followed. Keanu watched, knowing the ripples of today's events would last far beyond this gala. He glanced at his phone, dialing his assistant. "Patrick, I need your help. A woman named Isabel Morin will call tomorrow, help her find job training, and look into homelessness initiatives in LA. I want to do more." After hanging up, he stepped onto his balcony, looking out over the sprawling city. He had come here seeking rest, but had found something far more important, a reminder of the power of kindness and the impact of one small act in a world too often blinded by status. Because in the end, true success wasn't measured in wealth. It was measured in humanity.